Hello everyone, welcome to Redbusters channel. Last week, USCIS made an announcement that they could technically deny an application without giving an RFE or an NOID. So this is the press release that came out on August 5th, right? So what we'll do in this video is look at the policy memo, how it will work, what changed from old to new, and what to expect, because let's say, and we look at a couple of examples of H1B, EAD, and how they will look at that things and what can happen, right? So that's what we'll cover in this video. If you want to subscribe to our channel, do subscribe for getting regular updates. We do specific topic related updates as well as weekly updates, so do subscribe. Without further ado, let's get started. So in summary, here is the news, right? On August 5th, effective immediately, last week, USCIS issued a policy alert saying that USCIS officers now have the discretion to outright reject or deny an application without issuing an RFE or NOID. RFE means request for more evidence and notice of intent to deny, right? So essentially what they're telling is in the past, the Biden era, 2021, they had a policy where they would usually first issue an RFE and NOID. But now with this new policy change, it restores to basically the first Trump administration's 2018 to 2021, where they have a broader discretion on, to deny an application without giving an RFE. So here is how both the old and the new one will work. In the past, before previous policy, officers were encouraged to issue RFEs and NOIDs before denying, and if there is missing evidence, you usually get a chance to fix. And RFE gave a standard 12-week response window. And you also get 14 extra for mailings outside of US. So people used to do this placeholder filings that could secure benefits such as EAD and all of that. So I think you see these placeholder filings. So one of the biggest things that they talk about in the press release is that many people are trying to do these placeholder filings where they're not really properly filing, and it's wasting USA's resources and time and all of that. So that's why what they're saying is, to avoid these placeholder filings and all of these things, they want to ensure that somebody who files an application with USCIS has all the basic requirements or initial evidence as part of that. So now USCIS officers, starting from August 5th, right, have full discretion to deny without giving an RFE or NOID if they miss the initial evidence. So this is very, very important because there is a checklist for each of them. We'll look at that in the next sections, right? So you need to provide all the initial evidence, when you file the application. There is no thing such as, like you will get an RFE and you get 12 weeks to send all of that. So incomplete filings are completely discouraged, and the burden is on you as an applicant to fix that. So the timelines look like this, right? So in the past, you used to get standard 12 weeks, and now the maximum is 12 weeks. You're not getting this by default, So that's the first one. And if you're NOID, the maximum response is about 30 days, right? And also they've changed it, in the past it used to be 2 weeks, 14 days for filed from abroad. Now that has become to 3 days. And there are no extensions allowed for these deadlines, So that's also another thing. And basically, it's important to note that, you need to look at your notice, whatever RFE that you get, and respond accordingly. So in terms of how it look, right, in terms of fees and denials as well, let's say in the past, the packet would be returned. If the packet is returned, right, at the intake itself, generally you can correct and refile, right? But now what happens, right, when you get a denial after accepting, the case is technically adjudicated and refused. So you won't get the filing fee refunded. You must basically file a brand new case again, pay fee again. So this is basically a denial is the final adjudication, and USCIS keeps the fees. So there is no refund as such because, you didn't, set a submit a document as such. So you would lose time, money, all of that, right? So that's why it's very important now, when you submit an application, it could be anything, right? Extensions or all of that. You look at that closely and submit, right? So what USCIS does is, right, here is an example of how it looks on a form. So if you go to USCIS website on this particular URL, uscis.gov I-129, this is actually for an H1B, right? So you would have a clear document or a web page that tells checklist for the required initial evidence for form I-129, right? So depending on the kind of form you're submitting, you would have to submit. For example, for H1B, it says evidence of the beneficiary's maintained status or extension of stay or amendment of stay. So basically, you want to submit to 994 for that, right? And evidence showing the proposed employment qualifies. So supporting documentation for special occupation. Evidence showing that a copy of required license, if that required portion requires license, you need to put that, right? And contract between employer and beneficiary, all of that. So that's the employment agreement and NLCA. So these are essentially the required documents from the checklist. So there will be some general documents as well as that. So now when you submit the application, you would have to go to this relevant forms webpage and ensure that you are submitting all of that. So let's look at another example, right? So this is for I-765, which is an EAD application, right? So the general requirements, right? For example, a copy of the Form I-94, print out of the electronic form, a copy of the last implement EAD document, if applicable, to identical passport photographs. And if somebody is representing G28 form, and if you're not previously issued, a copy of the government issued ID document, right? So, and in addition to this general requirements, you would also have your visa specific requirement that you would also have to put in there, right? So the whole idea is when you submit this, ensure that you look at the checklist relevant to the form that you're filing. If you're filing an extension I-539, then look at that checklist and also look at what is relevant for your visa type, and then ensure that you submit all of that. Let's say you basically miss that, then you lose that, right? So here's an example. Here is a URL basically of checklist. I mean, it's not difficult to find. It is basically on the USCIS website. Sometimes you might overlook that, but always go to the USCIS website so that you avoid these things, right? So how to avoid a denial? Use the official USCIS checklist because they really have initial evidence checklist. So don't really look at websites or blogs or some places random, and then try to go to the USCIS website and then basically get that checklist and follow that. That's the first one, and ensure that the burden is on you as an applicant from day one. So don't rely on, okay, we'll submit and then we'll, do an RFE, we'll get an RFE and all of that. No longer that, right? So basically you don't even know how much time you'll get. So that's very important. And read the instructions, if it takes extra time, look at the, each of the form have a guidelines as well, how to file that, right? So look at all of that. And, if you're in doubt, always go work with a lawyer and, how to do that. That way you basically don't run into these kinds of issues, right? So all in all, in key takeaways, right, this policy document lets USCIS officers deny incomplete filings without issuing an RFE and NOID, which is actually a very, very big deal. So you will lose your money if if you do any incomplete things, missing any initial evidence. That's what they call it, right? And it applies to cases pending on file on or August 15th, includes already in the queue. And RFE window is now on a case-by-case basis, right? They also reduce the some timelines. And the denial is final. USCIS will keep the fee and means you have to pay the fee again. So always check these things. Again, be careful because otherwise you'll lose your money and time as well. So again, subscribe for getting regular updates. Thank you for watching.